Hello, good morning. It's a lovely day if you're a duck. Raining out there, absolute trenches rain. Happy Monday, the last Monday of September. We're not module A328. How do empires begin? The empires and systems of trade, 176. In an extract from a 16th century English translation of Jan Huygen van Stoten's account of Goa, Littleton, who you will come across again in this next section, was a Dutchman who, in the years 1583 to 88, served as secretary to the Archbishop of Goa. His account was published in Dutch in 1596, with an English translation appearing in 1598. The spelling in the extract below is as it appears in the original translation. What does this extract suggest about the nature of the Viceroy's position in Goa? Or Viceroy in Portugal and of his government in India. Every 3 years there is a new Viceroy sent into India, and sometime they stay longer, as it pleaseth the king, but very few of them who continue if in Goa, which is the chief of Satai of India, where he hath his house and continual residence, and from thence all other towns in India have their direction and government. From Goa every year, in Portugal army is prepared and sent out, as I said before. He have his council, nobles, chancery, and justices as they use in Portugal, and the laws and justice are by him exalted and fulfilled in the king's name. Yet, if there be any matter of importance which concerneth the civil laws, they may appeal to Portingal. But in criminal causes no man may appeal, but such as have the degree of a gentleman. Such the viceroy may not judge, being prisoners, sending them into Portingal, unless it be the king's commandment. He is very magnificent in his estate, and goeth little out, but sometimes on Sundays or holy days, when he goeth to church, and when he goeth out of his house, the trumpets and shammers standing in the gallery of his house do sound. He is accompanied by all the gentlemen and townsmen of Goa that have or keep horses, with a guardian and of halberdiers on foot, both on each side and behind him. And being in the church, he have his settee in the queer, lined with velvet, and nailed with gilt nailers, and a cloth with two velvet cushions under his fetti and knees. And before him a bench with a velvet cushion to lean his arms upon. His gentlemen sit by him, but without the care, and by him standeth his chaplain that prayeth for him. The archbishop, when he is at the church, sitteth on his left hand, the same manner on carpets, cushions, and bench of velvet, where they served are all in ceremonial order as the kings of Portugal used to be. And when he cometh home again, the trumpets and shames do sound, as when he went out. In the hall of his palace stand the guard, and in the great hall, where his councils sit, are painted all the viceroys that he have governed in India since the first discovery and conquest thereof, and they new come. Their pictures are likewise placed there. Each fort and official outpost in Portugal's Eastern Empire was essentially an estado in miniature, with the captain of the fort taking the role of governor, advised by a treasury superintendent, Veda de Bazenda, a judge, the senior cleric, and a factor, the official in charge of royal trade. Large areas with a significant number of Portuguese residents might also have a municipal council to advise the captain. As in Portugal, and at the centre of the Estado in Goa, local officials would jealously defend their rights and privileges. In the Decades da Asia, the 16th century Portuguese historian João de Barros, 1496 to 1570, said that the Estado da India had two functions: war with the Moors and trade with the heathen. It is notable that both war and trade have a religious angle to them, and in Barros' phrase, moreover, trade in Portuguese Asia also had a very definite military angle, while the Estado da India can be seen as a remarkable attempt to establish an administrative set of institutions overseas at the time when Portugal, in common with other European states, barely had such institutions at home. The entire structure was essentially a military establishment supported by an army of clerks and clerics, as well as soldiers and sailors. To control the transoceanic scenic spice trade to Europe, the Portuguese kept the route to India secret from rivals for as long as they could. Once established in the east, they sought control of all the maritime trade in Asia, not just the spice trade to Europe. The Estado de India then very quickly moved from being a means to defend Portuguese trade to a means of aggressively designated crown trade routes, known as carriers, could be used only for the crown's trading or through payment of a fee by private inserts. The route between Asia and Europe via the Cape of Good Hope was one such carrier. Others were between Malacca and Chittagong in Bengal, between Malacca and Puddikat in southern India, between Hermes and Goa, and between Hermes and ports on the western coast of India. The trade between Asia and Portugal took the form of an annual voyage. The Carrera to India, although private finance and privately owned vessels participated in the voyages, the care was a crown route and in terms carried was shown monopoly. The crown did not have significant funds to provide the ships or buy goods to be exchanged for spices, most notably copper, which was the most important commodity of exchange for trade with India. Private interest, therefore, had to be included. The earliest voyages allowed foreign syndicates, mostly of Italian financiers, to provide their own ships in the fleets and compete with the crown. Dom Manuel, however, was uneasy as the prospect of losing his monopoly to private interests, so he refused to allow them direct access to India trade. While Italian merchants and financiers had supported the earliest Portuguese trade to India, German finances became increasingly important. The Fugger family of Asberg, for example, controlled much as a metal trade in Europe and were therefore able to not only supply the Portuguese crown but the copper required for trading with India. Collectively were given privileges by the crown, permitting them to trade in some commodities normally reserved as a monopoly of the crown or exempting them from certain taxes in return. The crown had a ready source of finance. The Portuguese trade empire involved wider European participation dependent upon other countries' finances, ships, and merchants, while also retaining some control over these elements of trade. Mercantilist states in the period sought to maximise their naval strength and income and demanded that trade from their colonies had to pass through the metropole and be carried in ships belonging to the metropole. The Portuguese crown's insistence on a monopoly of the spice trade fits that pattern, even though it allows foreign owned ships to participate. The Castle de India, based in Lisbon, was created in 1500 to regulate and administer crown trade. This developed into a major department of the Portuguese state. It might seem surprising, therefore, that in 1515 the Portuguese crown decided to move the sale of those Indian spices from Lisbon to Antwerp. Despite 12 years of monopolising the spice trade, Lisbon remained on the periphery of Europe in both economical and geographical terms. The periphery, I want to write that down, that word. Periphery. Periphery. Periphery of Europe in both economic and geographical terms. So Manuel orders sales six spice and moved into Flanders, then the economic heart of Europe. 16th century Antwerp was the centre of Europe's transport networks and European finance. Here, the Portuguese crown could access not just a billion, but also insurance credit and the metals required as exchange commodities. The Portuguese Empire in Asia was a European, not just a Portuguese project. While Portugal's trade from the east was incorporated into the rest of Europe's trading and financial networks, the Portuguese profited from intra-Asia trade rather differently. Claiming overlordship of the Indian Ocean, the Portuguese attempted to regulate and tax trading by others, imposing licensing fees and custom dues. Vessels wanting to ply their trade across the kings of Portugal's Indian waters, as he claimed them to be, were required to purchase a cartas from Portuguese controlled ports. A cartas promised safe conduct so long as the other regulations were obeyed, such as paying custom dues at Portuguese ports, not carrying goods prohibited by the Portuguese, including pepper and arms, and not carrying people considered hostile to the Portuguese. Breaches of these requirements could resist in the loss of cargo or of the vessel, and frequently the loss of life of crew members. In reality, the Portuguese lacked the ability in many parts of Asia to impose the system on a regular basis. Even in the waters of Western India, where the Portuguese had a greater presence, they failed to impose the monopoly on the pepper trade. Even if they profited to some extent from the scale of carters after the death of Emmanuel I in 1521, the impossibility of maintaining a monopoly over the space trade was recognised. Attempts to enforce it were first eased, then abandoned. Francesco Carletti was a Florentine merchant who set out from Seville in 1594 on a short slave trading trip and ended up on an 8-year around the world tour. The account he wrote of his travels was addressed to Fernandino de Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, and was perhaps written in hope of acquiring the Duke of as a patron. In the city of Goa, which is located on an islet not more than 15 miles in circumference and a 16 degrees of latitude toward the north, I took a house. The houses there were very comfortable and are good to look at, as also are the churches, particularly those of the Jesuits, of which there are three. These are that of the Novitate, which they also call Our Lady of a Rosary, a monastery called the Jesus, and a college called St. Paul's. In my time, at least, they kept the blessed corpse of their father Francis Xavier, one of the first religious of the Society of Jesus to go to preach the Holy Evangel in that of Orient of China and Japan. But let's go back to the Portuguese who lived there lavishly and comfortably in Goa, going about constantly on horseback, the horses being brought from Persia, with the ships from Ormuz and from Araba, and they give them as feed a certain variety of small beans, but cooked. And when they ride out, they have before and behind them goodly troops of slaves, including one slave carrying a club in his hand in the manner of a mace, open up the way, one with an umbrella, without which they never leave the house, one who drives off the flies with a red and white horse's tail, and the one who acts as a footman and one as a page. And in that style, they go all over the city if in triumph. And the city is made up of good houses and is well decorated. Today, the wives are mostly those born there of Portuguese fathers and Chinese, Japanese, Javanese, Moluccan, and Bengali mothers, and even mothers from Pegu and various other nations of that religion. These matches produces a somewhat brunette strain, but most of the women turn out to be very beautiful and, in particular, well formed as to person, and especially those who are born of the Bengali nation. In Malin Nuit suggests the Estado de India is an empire of settlement, pointing to its possession not only of Goa but also of adjoining Provincia de Norte, which had hundreds of square miles of territory with villages, small towns, seaports, and fortified frontier posts. The Estado collected rents from the settlers on the land, who also acted as an additional security force, while the Portuguese held Malacca. They also controlled something of the hinterland, there from which they collected rents. The Portuguese never controlled all of Sri Lanka, but they planted settlers in the kingdoms of Jaffna and Corals, although their numbers never matched those of temporary Portuguese residents in Sri Lanka. The suggestion in the Estado de India's territory extended beyond trading enclaves and included settlers is well made, but in terms of typology, the claim for it being an empire of settlement is not so strong. Once the Portuguese assured Goa, they were territorial rulers of Indian people. Amongst other things, they meant they were reasonable. Under the Papa Bull, Inter Cateria in 1493, the conversion of non-Christians under their control, despite Don Manuel's religious zeal, missioning activity, and played little or no part in the planning for Portuguese expansion in Asia. The aim was defeating Islam, not converting Muslims to Christianity. Hitherto, the Christian clerics on the Portuguese voyages to India were there to nurture Portuguese souls, not those of the locals. Portuguese governors of Goa made some attempt at forced conversions of the poor in Goa, accompanied by the destruction of some Hindu temples. It was not, however, until the arrival of the Jesuits, member of the Society of Jesus. In Goa, that serious attempts and conversion were made. The Jesuits played a significant role in shaping the culture of Portuguese enclaves in Asia. The Estado de India lacked trained administrators and lawyers, skilled diplomats, and place of education for Portuguese families living in Goa. The Jesuits provide them all. Malin Nuit suggests that by the second half of the 16th century, the fortunes of the society and of the Portuguese royal government were inextricably entwined. Jesuits had a free hand when it comes to attempts at converting the Indian population of the city and a provincia do Norte. The most influential Jesuit in this regard was Francis Xavier, one of the founders of the society who travelled to Asia in 1542. He insisted that all the Jesuit missionaries should learn the local languages and focus on education as a tool of conversion. Their role as diplomats and administrators ensured that they had contracts amongst the elites of Asian societies, allowing them to operate in places not controlled by the Portuguese. Their influence within the Portuguese Empire in Asia would continue to grow, peaking in 1620 and leading to the Estado de India, widening its political horizons and interfering more extensively in internal political affairs of Asian and African states. Government and religious conversion thus become difficult to disentangle. The Jesuit influence would soften, to some extent, the aggression towards Muslim states in India, and the society established a mission at the court of the Mughals in Delhi in 1580. The religiously militant impulse amongst the court in Portugal and the military commanders of the Estado had diminished. By the end of the 16th century, Muhammad Query, however, argues that throughout the 16th century, the Portuguese physically attacked Muslim culture by deliberately targeting Hajj pilgrims, stopping and sinking their ships under the guise of demanding to see the Carters. And he further argues that the Jesuits intentionally generated a hostile attitude towards the Hajj pilgrims amongst the Portuguese administration. Corey's argument that any sense of division between the secular Portuguese officials and the religious Jesuits would not work once we analysed their entanglement with Hajj. You can find support in the broader entanglement between the Jesuits and the Portuguese administration referred to earlier. Throughout the 16th century and beyond, the Portuguese viewed Muslims differently to people of other religions, even if they no longer fought about recapturing Jerusalem. Religion, money, and power, it seems, were inextricably linked in the foundation administration of the Estado da India. The Dutch intervention. 100 years after Almeida set sail for Asia to establish the Estado da India, the Portuguese lost the island of Ambon in modern Indonesia to a European rival. In the ensuing decades, the Dutch would establish their own trading empire in the east. The Dutch breakthrough. The Portuguese authorities successfully kept trade routes in the east in secret for a long time, although the map stolen by Alberto Catino in 1502. The planisphere that you looked at in Unit 2 is considered very detailed for the period. Its portrayal of the coast of Africa and Asia was not sufficient to enable sailors to navigate safely. There must have been many crew members of merchant ships that sailed the route who would have willingly sold what they knew for the right price. But what they knew was insufficiently detailed. Pilots with access to detailed charts and other navigational information appear to have remained loyal. That changed in 1596 with the publication in Dutch of Itinerario, written by Jan Huygen of Van Lichoten, a Dutchman who had served as secretary to the Archbishop of Portuguese Goa in 1583 to 1588. Van Lichoten's book offered detailed description of life in Goa, but also classified information about trade and navigation in the ocean. Lichoten may not have been the first commercial spy, but he was perhaps the most significant. The publication of Itinerano in 1596 was followed by a number of translations into other languages, with an English edition appearing in 1598 and French, German, and Latin translation appearing soon after. Part of the Dutch version was printed in 1595 and made available early to Cornelius de Houtman, commander of the first official Dutch expedition to Asia. De Houtman appears to have had the diplomatic and managerial qualities of the Ghana. Due to insufficient provisions, 70 crew members died before they passed Madagascar. He also insulted the Sultan of Banda, ransacked the island of Madura, which had received them peacefully, and arrived home in the Netherlands with only 87 of the 249 men who departed on the expedition with him. De Houtman's voyage, however, had demonstrated the possibility of trade directly with Indonesia. the formation of the United East India Company. The problem the Dutch faced at the beginning of the 17th century was not a lack of companies to trade with in Asia, but the superfeit of them. For his first voyage, de Hoopman had been employed by the Compagnie van Veer, established in Amsterdam in 1594. The number of companies trading to the east after 1595, all acting independently and often in opposition to each other, was soon recognised as counterproductive into Dutch rivalry, dissipated investment and diminished prices and consequently profits. The home cities of those traders and the home ports of the ships each had vested interest in promoting their local trading companies, so the Dutch government, the States General, stepped in to find and enforce a compromise. In 1602, the decision was taken to establish the Verenigde of Oostenduitse campaign of United East India Company, also often referred to as the Dutch East India Company to distinguish it from the English version formed from the previous. To ensure that the purpose of United Company are achieved to the greater benefit of these united provinces, to maintain and expand trade, to profit the company, we do hereby license the above mentioned, accompanied with the conditions as follows. No person, regardless of constitution or capacity apart from those of the above mentioned company, shall be permitted to sail from the United Provinces to the reach east of the Cape of Good Hope or through the Straits of Magellan for the next 21 years at pain of confiscation of ships and cargoes. The period shall commence in the year 1602 inclusive. Similarly, east of the Cape of Good Hope and in and beyond the Straits of Magellan, representatives of the aforementioned company shall be authorized to enter into commitments and enter into contracts with princes and rulers in the name of the States General of the United Netherlands or the country's government in order to build fortifications and strongholds. They may appoint governors, keep armed forces, install judicial officers and officers for other essential services, so to keep the establishments in good order, as well as jointly ensure enforcement of the law and justice, all combined so as to promote trade. In respect to trade and commerce, the above mentioned governors, the judiciary and military shall be required to swear an oath of loyalty to the States General or to the above mentioned government and to the company. These in turn may dismiss the above mentioned governors and members of the judiciary should it be found that they have acted corruptly and dishonestly. On the understanding of the aforementioned, governors and officers shall not be prevented from coming forward to express to us or the company their concerns and dissatisfactions, should they have any. Under ships returning, the company officials shall be required to inform the gentlemen of States General in respect to those governors and officers that they have appointed in the above mentioned establishments and of fortresses so that their appointments can be approved and ratified. Should any of these of the above mentioned company have been cheated or been mistreated in some location or have trusted that they would have received promised monies or be paid for part of a deal and did not receive the reimbursement or payment.